Hello, welcome to the session of Talking Tech, Women and Girls in ICT. My name is Kaoru Inoue, and I work at the Global Enabling Sustainability Initiative, or GeSI. Today, I'm excited to be having a discussion about tech and tech careers with Yu-Ping Chan, Senior Program Officer in the Digital Cooperation Team at the United Nations. Talking Tech is a series celebrating girls and women in tech being recorded around the world between Girls in ICT Day 2020 and Girls in ICT Day 2021. Girls in ICT Day is an international day marked on the fourth Thursday of each April. In 2020, Girls in ICT Day was 23rd April. The objectives of Girls in ICT Day are to help to create a global environment that empowers and encourages girls and young women to consider studies and careers in the growing field of information and communication technologies. The Talking Tech series is brought to you by the ITU, UNICC, and the Office of the UN Secretary General's Envoy on Youth, and is in support of Equals, the global partnership for gender equality in the digital age. GeSI is pleased to be a partner on this session today. The goals of the series include to interest and inspire girls and younger women with information about a range of ICT careers that can be had, bring before a broader audience some of the role model women in tech and share information about their career journeys and work, offer diverse examples of how ICT is being used to support achievement of the Sustainable Development Goals and other UN goals, showcase initiatives that are working with girls to support them in ICT studies or future ICT careers, provide girls and young women in tech with a leadership opportunity to represent and promote a Girls in Tech organization with which they're involved and promote it to a broader international audience. So to kick this session off, I'm going to introduce you to GeSI. GeSI is a globally recognized thought leader, partner of choice, and proactive driver of the ICT sustainability agenda as measured by the development and use of its tools, broader member base, and contributions to relevant policies. Our vision is to build a sustainable world through responsible ICT-enabled transformation. For more information, you can always visit gesi.org. Complementing my passion for technology, I'm also very passionate about a more gender-balanced tech sector. So I'm very delighted to now shift to a conversation with Yu-Ping Chan, the Senior Program Officer in the Digital Cooperation Team at the United Nations. So Yu-Ping, when and how did you get into technology? What was your path from then, and what's your job in tech now?
Thank you so much for having me here today. It's interesting a question how I got into tech. I actually am not a tech person by training or by background. I actually started off as a foreign service officer, a diplomat with the Singaporean Foreign Ministry. And I actually worked in the Singaporean Foreign Ministry right after university where I studied government. And I was with the Singaporean Foreign Service for 9.5 years, including a posting to the United Nations here in New York, where I represented Singapore on issues such as human rights, legal issues, Security Council, and General Assembly issues. So at no point did I actually get into tech, though I did encounter it to a certain extent when we were negotiating resolutions or as it came up in the context of certain issues. So I was not a tech person, but what happened was that after my time with the Singaporean Foreign Service, I actually joined the UN Secretariat. And in the UN Secretariat, I've been now with the Department of Political Affairs, the UN Office on Drugs and Crime, the UN Office on Counterterrorism, and my latest incarnation really has been in this tech field where I lead the digital cooperation team in the Office of the Undersecretary General, USG Fabrizio Horseshoe, who serves as special advisor to the Secretary General on issues regarding digital cooperation. The work that I do currently in the Office of the Undersecretary General with my team has really been about coordination and bringing together different players in the tech space behind the vision of the United Nations on digital cooperation. So in June this year, the Secretary General launched the Roadmap for Digital Cooperation, which is the culmination of many discussions that the United Nations has been holding on digital cooperation and technology and how we can better come together to harness the benefits of technology while mitigating its challenges. So the Secretary General's Roadmap lays out the Secretary General's vision for how the United Nations should engage on key digital challenges, such as achieving universal connectivity by 2030, digital human rights, achieving digital inclusion, artificial intelligence, and creating a more robust digital cooperation architecture. So this has really been a challenge of coordination and partnership and really bringing together everybody, not just member states, but also, as I've said before, civil society, the tech companies, academia, experts, to really brainstorm how the world can do better when it comes to rising to the challenge of our digital future. So that really has been an achievement that my team has been able to put together. And in implementing the roadmap now and the Secretary General's vision for this, we really will have to count on the continued partnerships, collaboration, and engagement of all of our partners. So you would say that my path to tech has actually been very winding and not tech related at all. And what I find very actually interesting about this whole process is that I think it shows how, even though you might come from a different background, have studied different issues, the way you interact with technology and then can serve as an advocate for technology, and in my case, digital cooperation, can always be there for somebody who's interested in this particular area. What I also have found interesting as I reflect back on my time outside the tech sector formally or as part of the technology fields is that a lot of my work actually has intersected with technology. I mentioned, for instance, the fact that when we negotiated General Assembly resolutions, when I represented Singapore in speaking before the United Nations, we would occasionally touch on the importance of technology as it pertained to humanitarian responses, for instance, or we would reflect on technology as an enabler for certain types of things. But we would do this in a very sort of glancing manner without the opportunity to go into it in depth. So my path to technology now allows me to actually look at these issues in greater detail. I'd also encountered technology in instances where, for instance, in the Office of Counterterrorism, I was involved with the Office of Counterterrorism's work on preventing violent extremism online through preventing terrorist ideologies and working with technology companies to counter terrorist narratives, the use of the internet and social media by terrorists, and also sort of addressing extremist narratives and dangerous ideologies online. So there has been encounters with technology, but not to the detail that I have gone into now, where I lead the digital cooperation team in the Office of the Undersecretary General.
Fantastic. And so with these experiences that you have you encountered any challenges along the way? And if so, how did you overcome them?
I think a challenge that I've realized over time and sort of based on my own experience is the fact that to some extent, people have a tendency to think of tech as an add-on to what they're doing. So in the Office of Counterterrorism, for instance, technology was an add-on as opposed to something that's integral to the way we function. And in my current role as leading on the digital cooperation side within the United Nations, you increasingly realize how fundamental technology actually is to almost everything that the international organizations and the UN itself is doing. And in some ways, I think this realization has been heightened by COVID, when now we are forced to work virtually, where the only means of communication in many cases is online, remotely. And now we're confronted with what the opportunities are with digital technology, but at the same time, the challenges as well, and how dependent we are really on the basic fact that we can communicate like this virtually, that we can still work with our teams remotely, that we can WhatsApp our families and friends. But that dependence on digital technology, I think, has already always underlined a lot of what we've been doing. It's just been brought to the fore by COVID. So part of the challenge, I think, that I've experienced has been sort of convincing people that technology cannot just be, as I said before, an add-on or fringe. It has to be central to the work that we're doing here. So we've been helped by COVID, sadly to say, that now I think it's increasingly clear to other UN entities, governments around the world, civil society, that it is something that has to be grappled with in our daily functions. I think the challenge is to continue that type of political momentum that we've actually gained through COVID and translate this into long-term sustainable programs by which we address, for instance, technology's impact on the world. You talked about GeSI and how your organization's goal is to really build a sustainable future with the use of technology. And I think, again, that is part of it, sort of making the discussion about technology and our use of technology is part of the overarching vision for sustainable development and the world that we want to build after this.
Great. And you've mentioned some of the work experiences that you've had. And a lot of that has been in building partnerships and collaborating with other UN entities, member states, and other stakeholders. How have you honed your skill in coordinating and bringing people together?
I think that part of it actually is sort of figuring out what is in everybody's interest. You have to find a win-win solution that works for everyone. You have to realize that everybody comes from different places, different contexts, and organizations have different goals. And the way to most effectively build a long-term partnership and a sustainable collaboration is to figure out what both organizations bring to the table and how you can make it so that it is something that is in the interest of both sides. I think we at the United Nations tend to take a very, in some ways, idealistic view of how the world should be. And in some ways, it's not the same view of the world that an individual government might have, or even a private sector company. And this is particularly pertinent for tech companies, right? I mean, we have to be very realistic about it. At the end of the day, private sector companies are driven by certain motives, and it's not necessarily altruism. So we need to find a way where the goals of the United Nations or international organizations can then bring those objectives in line with what private sector companies themselves also want to do, and persuade them in a way that really is collaborative without seeking to create a situation where, either side feels that they're taking advantage of, or it's a way that is ultimately not sustainable in the long run. So I think a lot of partnerships, be it with member states, with United Nations entities, or with the private sector, is about finding that kind of dynamic, that win-win combination, that alignment of interest that makes it so that cooperation can be beneficial for all of us. That is not to say, of course, that, we can't have certain principles and certain universal standards that we all work towards. And I think that these underline some key aspects of what the United Nations has to stand for. And so that is where I would also say that, in building the partnerships and the alliances, we as the United Nations and international organizations still need to remember fundamentally what is our objective in trying to build this more equitable, sustainable world. So for instance, the United Nations has been very clear about the emphasis on universal connectivity, that even though so many of us can enjoy the benefits of digital technology and being online, 3.6 billion people, almost half the world's population, still don't have access to the internet and these types of benefits that we all can enjoy. So at the very core of it, even though we say we look for win-win solutions, we need to bear in mind the people that we serve the most, the people who are technically left out and left behind by these types of technologies, and that a lot of our efforts must be geared towards ensuring that all of us can participate in the benefits of technology. At the same time, I think it's also important to realize that technology has a lot of risk and challenges. And so it is these partnerships and collaborations that allow us to best mitigate these challenges as well. So it's important to see that it's not just the United Nations working with governments. It has to be the United Nations working with the tech sector, civil society organizations, academia, the technical community as well, to find solutions that are long-term sustainable as well as practical and implementable.
So since then, this series is about girls and women in technology. What is your career or tech advice for girls and younger women in tech?
I would say two things. First, from my own experience, don't assume that just because you don't have technical background or purely tech background, that you can't find your way into technology and make some kind of contribution. I think that the technology field is broad enough that even if you're not technically trained or an AI specialist or somebody who's really spent your entire life looking at open source solutions, you can still have a way to sort of build a more robust technology ecosystem that works for the benefit of everybody. And even if I, sort of a diplomatic ex-government policy type, can sort of make a contribution in a useful manner to what the UN is doing on digital cooperation technology, then I think really, the sky is wide open. It's like an open field for everybody to try and see how you can contribute to the tech sector. The other thing I would say is, I think it's important that everybody be curious and interested from the start. That, like I said, it's not seen as sort of a luxury or fringe add-on, but it's something that underpins the way we work. I am very surprised, for instance, by how my children are out there Zooming by themselves. My 6-year-old is more, shall we say, equipped to handle Zoom at the start of the whole remote schooling situation that I was ever, and that she adapted very easily to taking her little Chromebook into the room with her and like sort of muting her friends and having chats with her friends. And I think that kind of situation where the next generation will really grow up with technology being a fundamental part of their life is something that we need to recognize, that in some ways, it's not us older people that decide the rules and the way that the online environment will interact with society. It will be the next generation. And so this is why I've been actually emphasizing a lot that the voices of the young are really very important in determining how the United Nations and us and the international community and the rest of the tech sector decide to take forward digital cooperation and the steerage of the online world. I mean, you'll see, for instance, that like in a lot of these like tech testimonies, when the big tech companies went and testified before Congress here in the US, when there have been discussions about policies that the EU is going to pass or that governments are considering, it really is decided a lot by older individuals who perhaps have not grown up with technology in the same way that the next generation has and will be doing. So I really think that there needs to be a little bit more infusion of youth perspectives. And in that, I would also say that young women's perspectives are even more critical. It is for a fact that, for instance, women face certain challenges with being online that men don't face. And this goes for girls and boys as well. There have been studies that have shown how in COVID, for instance, 1 out of 2 girls online have faced increased cases of online harassment, that women and girls are more vulnerable to to online harassment and online violence online, and there are certain vulnerabilities that come with being a girl online. All this means there has to be greater support, greater empathy, and also greater listening to the voices of young women as to the challenges they face online and what they feel needs to be done to really empower them in that space. I would also say it's not just a case of safety, it's also a case of basic access as well. So the fact that universally there is, I think, a 20% gender gap in women's use of online technology and access to the internet versus men. I mean, these are barriers that fundamentally speak to inequities between men and women that should be addressed. The digital gender gap is fundamental to empowering women and girls online. And I really do think we owe it to the next generation. And my daughters out there still on their remote Zoom classes to make sure that they have full space and full opportunities online.
Thank you for that. That's really, really motivating, especially your first point as someone who doesn't have, I'm also in the tech space and I don't have those technical skills, but somehow here I am. So indeed, I fully agree with you that there is space and there's definitely room for everyone, especially for young people in this very, very vast tech space. So thank you for that. So I think we can go off into the second part of the conversation.
And I think this is where I ask you, Kaoru, the questions, the same questions that you asked me. And I'm really interested in hearing about it because you just said that you two are not a tech person by training. But I'd like to know, how did you get into technology and what do you like most about it? What inspires you?
Yeah, so I actually came into this tech world quite late, mainly because when I was growing up, I was discouraged to learn about technology because it was pretty much seen as a male-dominated space. So it wasn't until college that I really got into it. So I do consider that quite late. I learned about empowering migrant workers with technology in an international law course in college. And then I realized that there was more in this tech space than the usual Silicon Valley conversation. And so after I realized that there is this tech for good movement, there is this aspect of tech that really focuses on social impact, I knew that this was an area that I wanted to be involved in.
What have you done in tech that you're particularly excited about? What are your big accomplishments or something that you point to as feeling that you've really made a difference in tech?
What I like most about tech is that it's quite simple and complex at the same time. It's that technology is everywhere, which means that there's potential everywhere, be it climate change, smart cities, tech for human rights, e-learning, artificial intelligence, e-health. Because it's everywhere, that gives me an opportunity to try all these different subjects within the larger umbrella of technology. So for me, the interests, the possibilities are endless because I also have so many interests. So as long as technology is always a part of that, I'm happy to go wherever my career ends up taking me, whichever path I go.
Building on that, what then is next for you then, Kaoru? Do you have any particular projects or plans that you're particularly excited about that you're working on right now?
Yes, so right now, GeSI is working on this exciting initiative. It's called the Digital with Purpose Movement, and it's a framework that aims to accelerate on the achievement of the Sustainable Development Goals and the Paris Agreement targets through digital technologies. I would say in a nutshell, it's an ESG rating, there's working groups, there's plenary sessions, but the idea is to have participating companies and organizations join this race to the top by engaging in discussions, sharing data and their performance with other participants. And then, of course, the latter part, which is deploying technology solutions for a more sustainable world. So as part of this movement, we have a few working groups that touch on issues such as climate change, circular economy, digital inclusion, digital trust and responsibility. So it's a heavy set of topics, but it's really motivating and ambitious. We have different companies and organizations that are already involved, and you can find out more about it by going to digitalwithpurpose.org. And we actually just launched it at the Web Summit on December 2nd.
That's great. Do you have any last messages for young women and girls in technology?
Last messages, I would always say don't be afraid to step forward and put yourself out there when it comes to being a leader. For example, I've only really taken on this role of director very, very recently, and I'm still quite young. So I'm still navigating how to shape this new position into my own. Youth in tech is such a big interest of mine, and I want others to see that there are young professionals like myself that we should be given an opportunity and a chance to manage, take on big roles, and we are indeed capable of taking on leadership roles in this huge tech umbrella. There's a lot of room. So young people should very much be involved in that. And projects like Digital with Purpose is a huge undertaking. It's very daunting for someone like me who's still a little bit new into this field. But the fact that I have peers and I have my boss really, and I have all these very high level people encouraging us to take on this project is a big, big deal. So don't be afraid to take on bigger roles, and definitely have people who inspire you and support you.
I think that's very inspirational too, as well. I'd also say this as somebody who is also, I think, considered somewhat young in the UN system for what I do. I do really think that youth is not barrier. I think commitment and passion and competence is really what should decide things, not just how old you are or whether you've been doing this long enough. I think so long you show that you're able to do it, youth should not be a barrier, and neither should gender. And this is really where I feel very passionately about this, that you're right, too much is said about how tech is a male dominated sector, and that to some extent, if you look at representation across the board, women are not as represented as they should be. And it's really something I think that we all as women in tech have to work together against, and really try and lift up the sisterhood of women who are strong in tech and are really out there trying to change the world for it to be more equitable digitally for all women and girls out there.
Very, very well said, Yupeng. Well, that wraps up our session today for Talking Tech, Women and Girls in ICT. Thank you so much for joining me in this session today. I really enjoyed our chat. And thanks so much to our viewers for viewing.
Thank you, everybody.